Hi, and welcome back inside Uplift Property Management. Today we're going to be talking about a question we get all the time. How do I add or build an ADU on my property, and what are the steps to do that? And today, Chris Tagg, owner and CEO of Tagg Construction, one of our trusted vendors, is here to talk to us just about that. So Chris, all the time I get this question. People want to add an ADU to their property or a junior ADU, and what are the steps? How does one go about doing that? I'm assuming it's kind of a complicated process.
So first step we want to take is to hire a drafter and engineer and to come up with a design and figure out if you're going to do a JADU, which is an attached, or if you can do a detached ADU. If you have a good drafter that provides some concierge service, like I personally use, they'll go down to the city and do all the footwork for you. They'll find out where your setbacks are, if you can do a detached and what size that is, or if you can do an attached one. It's really helpful that during that process to find a contractor, to choose a contractor that you're going to work with. There's some like myself that donate their time up front to try and land the project in the first place. That will help you with walking through with advice on design, and then also when you get your first round of plans, if you have a good contractor, they go through and say, hey, to the engineer, what if we did this? And if we did it this way, it could save the customer money.
Now, I know it's not necessary to get a contractor up front, but could you give a good example of a time where yourself have saved a client money because they got that contractor up front during this first stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're doing one right now in Del Mar, and the first round of plans came back. They have a decorative tower on the top, and so the engineer designed it with steel I-beams and all this wrap to make it fully functional. And so I immediately came back and said, hey, when the homeowner was concerned about the budget, I said, if we put trusses here and make that tower a false tower, that right there saves the customer $60,000 right off the bat. And of course, the customer was ecstatic, and that's the way we decided to go. So the engineers went back. He said, all right, I'll design this with trusses and a false tower on the top, and save the customer money, and we moved on, and they're happy.
Okay, so step one, we've hired a drafter, we've hired an engineer, hopefully we've hired a contractor to help in that process.
Yeah.
What's the next step in building this ADU?
Once you've kind of chosen that, you need to go down to if you're the county or your city, you need to go down there and tell them, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. That's where having that drafter that provides the concierge service, or even some engineers do it. They will go down to the county for you, or the city, the local. So
you're not actually going down there, as long as you find a good drafter who they'll go and do it for you.
Some people don't want to pay the extra, but it's not that large of an additional fee if you get a good one. So you don't necessarily have to go down there yourself. If you choose the right people on your team, they'll go down there and they'll figure out all the information that the city wants.
Okay, and we're going, San Diego County, Temecula, Riverside. Really, we have lots of different areas, and they all have different rules. So we have to make sure we're going to the correct jurisdiction where those permits. Where can you find out where that office would be for the location your house is at?
You would have to Google it. You'd have to go to each one and say, city. You can look up if you're in the county or city jurisdiction, and then who's the local authority, basically. If you just type in on Google, like for instance, Ramona, if you type in Ramona, where do you go for permits for the city of Ramona, and it'll say this is an unincorporated city or an unincorporated area, and you are under the jurisdiction of the county of San Diego, and then it'll provide the address there in downtown.
Okay, so we've gone to our local jurisdiction to pull permits. What comes next?
Yeah, so you got your initial set of stamped engineered plans. You went down to the city, you pulled the permits. Now you're going to want to start shopping around for other quotes from contractors. Hopefully you have one that you really like, that you started this with, but obviously you haven't signed any contract with them. So now get your preliminary numbers. And the reason I say they're preliminary numbers is because what the engineer has in mind and what the city has in mind by the time that they get it and it goes through all of their people can sometimes be two different things. When you're doing these projects, everybody's water main is typically 3/4, and so when you're starting to add more units, things that take water inside of any house to a property, then you have to do a fixture unit count. Every city or county is different based on what they use for their fixture unit counts. And so a project we just had in North Park we were 2 fixture units below their maximum number before they required a 1-inch water main, and the city decided, we don't care, we want you to upgrade the main, and that just cost the customer $40,000. And that came out of nowhere all the way at the very end when they were about to release the permits so that you could start the project. And so that's why when I say preliminary, you just never know what the city's going to come back and say. The city also on that same project said, we understand you're putting 5/8 drywall, which is overkill. Typically it's 1/2 inch, but we also now want you to do type X 2-hour rated, fire rated drywall on the outer edges of the building, on the left and the right, and on the ceilings. And that cost the homeowner an additional $10,000.
So it sounds like besides, that preliminary quote, owners need to budget for unexpected things.
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So we've gotten contractor quotes. What is the third step here in building our ADU?
In the middle of the process, you're going to end up getting your first round of revisions, and that's when the city comes back and says things like the drywall or even the water main, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to say that right then and there. Obviously, the drywall actually in the North Park one came up in the first round of revisions. The water main came up later. Now, during that, you talked about budgeting. You're going to need to start coming up with a budget. You're getting your preliminary estimates. You're creating that budget to see what you can afford. And before you submit your first round of revisions, you're going to want to find out what you can afford. So some people get into this thinking, then they have a number in mind, and that number might not be realistic. And so you want to start figuring out what your budget is. I have a project we're working on right now. We gave them a preliminary cost, and now we've gotten through the engineering and we're at the first round of revisions, and they said, hey, maybe we don't need to add this addition that's just essentially a pantry that's going to the exterior. Maybe we don't need to do this addition. How much is that going to save us? And that by not doing what the pantry that they wanted, they're saving about $13,000. So now they're rebudgeting, and of course during your first round of revisions is the time that you're going to want to submit any change like that. You tell your engineer, hey, we're not doing the pantry anymore, we're not doing whatever it is. Now they're going to remove that from the plans, remove all those additional things. Then you're going to resubmit to the city and then wait for them to come back with whether or not it's just approved or if they have any wacky things, for instance, like the water meter.
Okay, so you've submitted those revisions, you've budgeted. What comes next?
What comes next? So once the city has accepted everything and your plan's good, everything's good to go, you're going to get what we call a set of city-approved engineered plans, and now you can get complete, accurate quotes from all of your contractors, because we got the preliminary, and then during that process, the city came back and made changes, or you made changes, and we had to submit first stage or second stage revisions, and then now you have a city-approved set. That means you're ready to start your project. So now you take that back to the contractor or contractors that you were considering, and they can provide you with accurate, definitive estimates at that point.
And at this point is when you would sign a contract with your
Correct.
Contractor.
Yes.
And choose which one?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Now you're ready to start your project. I would say there's some things that you want to discuss with your contractor during this time, and it's are your utilities going to be down, your electrical, your water, your gas during any part of this, so that people can pre-plan if they need to go and stay in a hotel or a friend's house? Because during these projects, obviously, sometimes we get to stages where you're not going to have utilities for 1 to 3 days. And so those are things you want to plan. You want to plan if you're adding to the existing house, whether it's an ADU or an addition, is where you're going to place all your stuff. Plans for the contractor to be able to place their equipment, possibly a storage pod on the property, or space in the garage, or on the property somewhere that they can store all their equipment, so they're not having to transport it back and forth. You're on the roll. You're on the track to complete your project.
Typically, how long would you estimate an average ADU would take your contractor from the start of this whole process where you're submitting plans to your, we're done and ready to rent out the ADU?
With the city, all the cities are on different time schedules. I did a project in Encinitas, and it only took them 30 days to give us permits for the entire project. North Park took 6 months. Our Newport project took 3 months. So the city's time frame doesn't always jive with everybody else's. So I usually say I would expect to wait between 3 to 6 months to get your city approved plans so that you can start your project. And then I would say from a contractor standpoint, if you're doing a 500 to 800 square foot ADU, I would typically factor anywhere between 6 to 9 months.
And I know a big question for a lot of our current owners and anyone looking for an ADU is, or to add an ADU to their property, is how much value is this going to add, and what can we rent this out for? So pulling some numbers for San Diego and Temecula, 1 and 2 bedroom ADUs in San Diego for a 1 bedroom ADU, we're looking at a monthly rent of $1,200 to $2,800. Really just depends on the area of San Diego. I know San Diego has so many different pockets.
I would also, a question for you, going based off of that, which would be good for people that are considering building an ADU for rental use, is what about quality of materials? Would you say that they're going to be able to get a higher rent if they went with more of a higher grade designed project, as opposed to doing something that's just kind of middle of the road materials and style and stuff like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I would say in a normal market that does have a factor, and in today's market it does have a small factor, but we are in a declining rental market right now. So things like amenities and style, I'm seeing a lot of people shift more towards I just need a place to live that is affordable and that I can support my family and be able to live comfortably. But the market's always shifting. So as we kind of back off that really price sensitive market we're in right now, definitely the quality of the ADU is going to make a huge difference. Also the size of an ADU. A 1,200 square foot ADU is going to go for more than a 500 square foot ADU. It really just depends on what you're building and what the person is looking for.
And location.
And location, is really important. Alrighty, well, if you are interested in learning more about putting an ADU on your property, feel free to reach out to us here at Uplift. We'd love to get you connected with Tagg Construction and do a consult with you, and would love to go over what those rental prices would be in your specific area that you want to build in. And Chris can get you some of those preliminary quotes on what that might cost to complete your project.